The world has changed in 6 months. Those who once declared, "I shall die for the emperor, I shall not look back," now become black marketeers. The women who bravely sent their men off to war, now, after 6 months, mechanically tend to their husbands' memorial tablets, and soon, it won't be long before they embrace new loves. It's not that humans have changed. Humans have always been this way. Only the surface of society has changed. They say that one reason the 47 Ronin were executed, rather than pardoned, was an old-fashioned concern that they might live on in disgrace, tarnishing their honorable names. Such sentimentality doesn't exist in modern law. Yet, this tendency lingers in the human heart. The desire to see beautiful things remain beautiful seems to be a common sentiment. Some years ago, a young man and woman committed suicide in Oiso, vowing to end their lives in the name of love while still virgins. The public sympathized deeply. A few years ago, when my close niece took her own life at 21, I felt a sense of relief that she died while still beautiful. Though she appeared pure, there was a fragility about her, a fear that she might fall into the depths of hell, and I couldn't bear to imagine her future. During the war, writers were forbidden from depicting war widows falling in love. The military government, in its cunning, wanted to keep these women chaste, likely to prevent them from being tempted and corrupted. The military men were keenly aware of human vices, and they understood all too well the fickleness of the female heart. That's precisely why they came up with such prohibitions. It's often said that Japanese warriors have historically been ignorant of the female heart, but this is a superficial view. The extremely rigid code of Bushido they devised served primarily as a bulwark against human weakness. Bushido dictates that a samurai must pursue his enemy relentlessly, even if it means becoming a beggar. But did any truly loyal and filial samurai ever chase down their enemies solely out of a burning desire for revenge? What they knew was the code of Bushido and the honor it prescribed. Japanese people are, by nature, not prone to lasting hatred. Yesterday's enemy is today's friend. This optimistic outlook reflects their true feelings. Reconciliation and camaraderie with yesterday's enemy are commonplace. They readily serve two masters, even former enemies. Never suffer the shame of being captured alive. Without such rules, it would be impossible to motivate the Japanese to fight. We are obedient to rules, but our true feelings often contradict them. Japanese war history is less about Bushido and more about strategy and cunning. We can understand the mechanisms of history better by examining our own hearts than by relying on historical accounts. Just as today's military government banned writing about widows in love, the warriors of old needed Bushido to suppress their own weaknesses and those of their subordinates. Kobayashi Hideo describes politicians as a breed who merely manage and control without originality, but this doesn't seem to be entirely true. While the majority of politicians may fit this description, a few geniuses possess originality in their methods of management and control. These methods become the standard for mediocre politicians and manifest as a form of history, a gigantic living will that permeates each era and its politics. In the realm of politics, history is not merely a collection of individuals but a separate, enormous organism that absorbs individuals. Politics, in the form of history, also exhibits immense originality. Who started this war? Was it Tojo or the military? While they bear responsibility, it was undeniably the will of a colossal being that runs through Japan, the inescapable will of history. The Japanese people were merely obedient children before history. Even if politicians lack originality, politics itself, in the shape of history, possesses originality and ambition, advancing with an inevitable pace like the waves of a vast ocean. Who devised Bushido? This too was likely history's creation, or perhaps its sense of smell. History is always sniffing out humanity. And while Bushido, with its prohibitions against human nature and instincts, is inhuman and anti-human, it is entirely human in that it is the result of an insightful observation of human nature and instincts. I also see the emperor system as an extremely Japanese, and therefore perhaps original, political creation. The emperor system was not created by the emperor. While emperors sometimes engaged in conspiracies, they generally did nothing, and their conspiracies invariably failed, leading to exile, flight into the mountains, and ultimately their existence being acknowledged for political reasons. Even when socially forgotten, they are politically resurrected. The political reasons for their continued existence are, so to speak, due to the intuition of politicians. They discerned the Japanese character and discovered the emperor system within it. This is not unique to the imperial family. If a substitute had been possible, it could have been the Confucius family, the Shakyamuni family, or the Lenin family. It just wasn't possible to replace them. At the very least, Japanese politicians, nobles and samurai, sensed the necessity of an absolute monarch as a means to ensure their own eternal prosperity. Though it wasn't eternal, they likely dreamed of it. The Fujiwara clan of the Heian period, while arbitrarily installing emperors, never doubted their subordinate position to the emperor, nor did they find it inconvenient. The emperor's existence allowed them to manage family disputes. Younger brothers outmaneuvered older brothers, and older brothers defeated their fathers. They were instinctive pragmatists, content with the enjoyment of their own lives. Yet, they loved and were satisfied with the strange formality of grand court ceremonies and paying homage to the emperor. Worshipping the emperor was a means of displaying their own dignity and feeling dignified themselves. To us, it's truly absurd. We were exasperated by the absurdity of being forced to bow our heads every time a train passed under Yasukuni Shrine. However, for certain people, that is the only way they can feel their own existence. So while we laugh at the absurdity of Yasukuni Shrine, we ourselves do similarly absurd things in other matters. We simply don't realize our own absurdity. Miyamoto Musashi, on his way to the duel at Ichijoji Sagaramatsu, is said to have involuntarily started to pray as he passed Hashiman Shrine but then stopped himself. His teaching of not relying on gods or Buddha stemmed from regret over this personal habit. We spontaneously worship quite absurd things and are merely unaware of it. The Confucian scholar first pays respect to his books at the lectern, likely feeling his own dignity and even his own existence in doing so. And we do similar things in various ways. A nation like Japan, adept at political maneuvering, needs the emperor for both strategy and justification. Even if individual politicians don't necessarily feel this need, their historical intuition prevented them from doubting this reality more than they questioned their own existence. Hideyoshi, after inviting the emperor to Jurakudai and weeping at the grand ceremony, felt his own dignity and simultaneously saw the god of the universe in the emperor. This was the case with Hideyoshi, not necessarily with other politicians. But even if political maneuvering is the devil's tool, it's not necessarily strange for the devil to worship God like a child. Any contradiction is possible. In essence, the imperial system, much like Bushido, is a concept where prohibitions, though seemingly inhumane and anti-human, hold a deep-rooted truth. Take, for instance, the saying a virtuous woman does not see two husbands. While the restriction itself might seem oppressive, it reflects a certain truth about human nature. Similarly, the imperial system, though neither absolute truth nor natural law, carries profound historical significance that cannot be easily dismissed. It's something that cannot be fully understood through simple truths or natural laws. It's a very human sentiment to wish for beautiful things to remain beautiful forever. In the case of my niece, perhaps it would have been better for her to live on and descend into hell, wandering a dark wasteland, rather than resorting to suicide. In fact, the literary path I've set for myself is such a wandering through a wasteland. Nevertheless, I can't seem to erase that small hope of wanting to keep beautiful things just as they are. Incomplete beauty is not true beauty. Perhaps it can only be called beautiful when the very act of falling and wandering through the inevitable hell becomes beautiful in itself. But why must a maiden of 20 be forced to constantly confront the image of her aged self at 60? I don't understand this. I prefer a beautiful woman of 20. People say that death renders everything meaningless, but is that really the case? I can't bring myself to wholeheartedly agree with the idea that those who died in the war are the ones to be pitied now that we've lost. But when I think of generals past 60, still clinging to life as they're dragged into court, I'm completely baffled by what constitutes life's allure. However, I can't help but imagine that I too, if I were a 60-year-old general, would cling to life in the same way. Life is a strange force that leaves me dumbfounded. Do those old generals also prefer beautiful women of 20, just as I do? And is it in the context of desiring those beautiful women that the war dead are to be pitied? If it were something so clearly defined, I could find peace, and even derive a conviction to single-mindedly pursue those 20-year-old beauties. But life is far more complex than that. I have a strong aversion to the sight of blood. Once, when a car accident happened right in front of me, I turned around and fled. Yet, I loved grand destruction. While bombs and incendiary bombs terrified me, I was also intensely excited by the violent destruction. Despite this, I feel like there was never a time when I cherished humanity more. I had refused the kindness of several people who encouraged me to evacuate and even offered me places to stay in the countryside, choosing instead to remain in Tokyo. I had intended to make Ui Hirasuke's air raid shelter in the burned ruins my final stand. When I parted ways with Ui, who was evacuating to Kyushu, it felt like I had lost all my friends in Tokyo. As the American forces landed and heavy artillery shells exploded all around, I imagined myself hiding in that shelter, and I felt ready to accept and await my fate. I thought I might die, but I must have been more certain that I would live. However, if you ask if I had any aspirations for surviving in the ruins, I had no prospects other than mere survival. The mysterious rebirth into an unpredictable new world. That curiosity was the freshest feeling in my life. It was as if I was possessed by a strange spell that told me I had to gamble staying in Tokyo as the price for that strangely fresh experience. Despite all that, I was a coward. On April 4, 1945, I experienced my first 2-hour bombing raid. When the illuminating flares turned the night sky as bright as day, my younger brother, who happened to be visiting from the countryside, asked from inside the shelter if those were incendiary bombs. I was about to tell him they were flares falling, but I realized I couldn't make a sound unless I consciously tensed my stomach. Also, at the time, I was working part-time for a film company. Right after the Ginza district was bombed, I witnessed another air raid from the rooftop of the company building. There was a tower on top of the 5-story building, and 3 cameras were set up there. When the air raid siren sounded, everyone disappeared from the streets, windows, rooftops, and Ginza. Even the anti-aircraft gunners on the rooftop hid in their trenches. The only people exposed under the open sky were our group of about 10 on the rooftop of the film company. First, a rain of incendiary bombs fell on Ishikawajima. Then, the next squadron came right above us. I felt my legs go weak. I was amazed by the sight of the cameraman, who looked so hatefully calm as he pointed his camera at the squadron with a cigarette in his mouth. But I loved the great destruction. The sight of people submitting to fate is strangely beautiful. All the grand mansions of Kojimachi vanished like a lie, leaving only embers, and a refined father and daughter sit on the green grass by the moat with a single red leather trunk between them. If it weren't for the vast ruins smoldering on one side, it would be no different from a peaceful picnic. Here too, on Dogenzaka, which has vanished and is now just a vast expanse of embers, lies a body halfway up the slope, seemingly run over by a car, not a bombing, covered by a sheet of corrugated iron. A soldier with a bayonet stood beside it. An endless stream of people coming and going, disaster victims, flowed past the corpse as if in a daze, like a mindless current, and no one even noticed the fresh blood on the road. Even those who did happen to notice it showed no more interest than they would in discarded scraps of paper. The Americans said that the Japanese were in a state of collapse and apathy immediately after the war, but the march of the disaster victims immediately after the bombing was a state of mindlessness with a surprising fullness and weight, different from collapse or apathy. They were innocent children of fate. It was always the girls of 15 or 16, 16 or 17, who were smiling. Their smiles were refreshing. Digging through the burnt ruins, putting the excavated pottery into burnt buckets, or keeping watch over their meager belongings, sunbathing on the road, were these girls of this age so full of dreams for the future that they were not bothered by reality, or was it because of their high vanity? I enjoyed searching for the smiles of girls in the burnt fields. Under that great destruction, there was fate, but there was no depravity. There was innocence, but there was fullness. People who had escaped through the raging flames huddled together beside their burning houses for warmth, and were in a completely different world from those who were desperately trying to extinguish the same fire, just a foot away. The great destruction, its amazing love. The great fate, its amazing love. Compared to that, the expression of defeat is nothing but depravity. But compared to the surprising ordinariness and naturalness of depravity, I feel that the beauty of that tremendous, great destruction's love and of people obedient to fate is nothing but an empty illusion like a bubble. The Tokugawa shogunate's ideology sought to make the 47 Ronin eternal heroes by killing them, but even if they could prevent the 47 from falling into depravity, there is no way to prevent humanity itself from constantly falling from heroism to mediocrity and then to hell. Even if you establish rules that a virtuous woman will not have 2 husbands and a loyal minister will not serve 2 lords, you cannot prevent the fall of man, and even if you succeed in preserving the chastity of a virgin by stabbing her to death, when you notice the ordinary footsteps of depravity, the natural footsteps like waves crashing in, you cannot help but find that the insignificance of human artifice, the insignificance of the virgin's chastity preserved by human artifice, is nothing but an empty illusion like a bubble. The heroes of the kamikaze squads are mere phantoms, and perhaps human history truly begins when we become black marketeers. The widow's sainthood is also an illusion, and perhaps human history truly begins when she embraces a new love. And maybe even the emperor is just a phantom, and the true history of the emperor begins when he becomes just a man. Just as history is a vast and living thing, so too is humanity astonishingly vast. The very act of living is truly the only wonder. To see 60 or 70 generals, not committing ritual suicide, but lined up in court like horses with bridles. This was the spectacular image of humanity revealed by the end of the war. Japan lost, and Bushido perished, but it was through the true womb of depravity that humans were first born. Live, fall. Is there any convenient shortcut outside of this rightful process that can truly save humanity? I dislike ritual suicide. A long time ago, a cunning and gloomy schemer named Matsunaga Danjo was cornered by Nobunaga and forced to die in his castle. But just before dying, he followed his daily routine and applied moxibustion to prolong his life, then pressed a gun to his face and blew his head off. He was over 70 at the time, a wicked man who shamelessly flirted with women in public. I agree with his method of death, but I don't like harakiri. I was trembling, yet I was also fascinated by the beauty of it all. I didn't need to think. There was only beauty there, no humanity. In fact, there weren't even any thieves. People say Tokyo is dark these days, but during the war it was truly dark. Yet, no matter how late it was, there was no need to worry about air raids or anything like that. We walked in the darkness of the night and slept with our doors unlocked. Wartime Japan was like an unreal utopia, overflowing with an empty beauty. It wasn't the true beauty of humanity. And if we forget to think, there is no more comfortable and spectacular show than this. Even with the constant fear of bombs, as long as you don't think, you can always be at ease, just captivated by the spectacle. I was a fool. I was playing with war in the most innocent way. After the war ended, we were allowed all kinds of freedom, but when people are allowed all kinds of freedom, they become aware of their own inexplicable limitations and lack of freedom. Humans can never be eternally free. Because humans live, and must also die, and because humans think. Political reforms can be carried out in a day, but human change doesn't happen that way. How much has human nature, discovered and taking its first steps towards establishment in faraway Greece, changed today, humans? No matter what kind of terrible destruction and fate war brings, it cannot change human beings themselves. The war is over. The heroes of the kamikaze have already become black marketeers, and the widows are already swelling their breasts with new love. Humans don't change. They just go back to being human. Humans are corrupt. Even righteous warriors and saints are corrupt. You can't prevent it, and you can't save people by preventing it. Humans live, and humans fall. There is no convenient shortcut to save humanity other than that. We don't fall because we lost the war. We fall because we are human, and we fall because we are alive. But humans will probably never fall completely, because the human heart cannot be as hard as steel in the face of suffering. Humans are delicate and fragile, and therefore foolish, but they are too weak to fall completely. In the end, humans cannot help but stab a virgin to death, cannot help but invent Bushido, cannot help but carry the emperor on their shoulders. But in order to stab their own virgin, to invent their own Bushido, their own emperor, people need to fall all the way down the right path of falling. And just like people, Japan also needs to fall. By falling all the way down, it must discover itself and save itself. Salvation through politics is nothing but superficial nonsense.